Dr. Ishrat Husain, if you'd like to please come on stage. Mr. Mani Shankar Alyar, would you like to please come on stage? Dr. Reddy, please come onto the stage. Thank you.
Neither of us from Lucknow.
This is rather high, isn't it?
Yeah, it's high. Isko niche karna.
Niche karna. Assalamu alaikum ji. It's working? Can you all hear me?
Just before we begin, if I may just quickly introduce our moderator. Seema Kamil is President and CEO of United Bank Limited. She is also chair of the Board of Governors of Karachi Grammar School and on the board of the Notre Dame Institute of Education. Ms. Seema Kamil.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon and Assalamu alaikum. United Bank is very honored and privileged that Dr. Ishrat has allowed us to host this occasion, and I believe it's going to be very interesting for all of us. And a very interesting topic. This is his latest book, Governing the Ungovernable, Institutional Reform for Democratic Governance. We have a very eminent panel with us, and I'm privileged to introduce them to you. We have with us Mr. Mani Shankar Alyar.
Is it okay?
He is a well-known author, diplomat, and has been a public servant. He has an economics degree from the University of Delhi and has also read economics at Trinity College, Cambridge. He's been associated with the Indian Foreign Service. He knows Pakistan well because he was India's first Consul General in Karachi. He's also been in the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gases and the Minister of Youth Affairs. He's the author of several books, and I found one title very interesting. It is Nikkarwala's Silly Billies and Other Curious Creatures. So I think it's very interesting for us. As a banker, we're very honored here to have Dr. Reddy. He's an ex-central banker. He has an economics degree from Madras University, India, and a PhD from the Osmania University in Hyderabad, India. He is also an honorary fellow of the London School of Economics. He's been associated with the Indian Administrative Services, Secretary Banking in the Ministry of Finance, an Executive Director with the IMF, and also the 21st Governor of the Reserve Bank of India. He is also a writer, and one book, again, which I thought would be interesting and I would love to read it, is Advice and Dissent, My Life in Public Service, amongst others. And of course, last but our author for today, Dr. Ishrat Husain, needs no introduction, as I'm sure you will all agree. But I think I know that you would be aware that he has a master's degree from Williams College in Development Economics, a doctorate from Boston University, and he is a graduate of the Executive Development Program sponsored by Harvard, Stanford, and INSEAD. He's been in the Pakistan Civil Service. He's been with the World Bank for 20 years. Of course, an ex-governor of the central bank, and I believe we can credit him for a lot of the reform of that institution. And as Dean and Director of IBA, I believe he has transformed that institution. So I think the country owes him a lot, Dr. Ishrat. Thank you. He's written a number of books, one of which is called The Economy of an Elitist State. And today we were going to talk about his latest book, which is Governing the Ungovernable. Very interesting title. This book is really about, and I'll let Dr. Ishrat talk about it in more detail, but I think it's a book about something about which we discuss all the time in our drawing rooms, on social media, at home, and we always saying that there was a time when Pakistan was amongst its peer group countries a leader. And for many years, we were the example. And countries which are Asian tigers then came and asked us, how did you do this? And how are you doing so well? And then something happened and we lost that momentum. And those countries and their institutions outpaced us. And this occupies our minds. But we often don't have very good answers. And Dr. Ishrat's book is based on his deep understanding of history, his academic research, empirical evidence, and I think most of all, his practical experience of this country. And his conclusion is that our institutional reform and governance have not kept pace with what we require. So with that summary, I would like, first of all, to ask Mr. Shankar Alyar to tell us about what he thinks about this book and his views on this concept.
You'll forgive me, madam, if I don't talk about the book, but about the title of the book.
Okay, yes.
It's simply that Mr. Reddy has far greater knowledge of what's written in the book than I have. And that's why I'm taking the easy way out.
Okay.
I wish to answer the question of how do you govern the ungovernable by saying there's only one way. Put governance in the hands of those who are ungovernable.
Yeah.
Get them to govern themselves. And I say this on the basis of the perception of an Indian Prime Minister with whom I had the great privilege of working extremely closely, but my work mostly was on the subject of how do you place governance in the hands of the ungovernable. Rajiv Gandhi, after 40 years of our being a virtually continuous democracy, said we may perhaps be the world's largest democracy, but we are also the world's least representative democracy. That for a population which at that time was about 800 million, he said we have a mere 550 or so elected representatives in parliament and about 4,500 in the state assemblies. And how can 5,000 people possibly effectively represent what then was getting close to 1 billion human beings? And the answer he found to this was to say, let us take democracy below to where people live. And therefore, a 3-tier system of local self-government, known in India by the expression Panchayati Raj, was introduced into the constitution. Tragically, it was not passed during Rajiv's lifetime, but perhaps it took his martyrdom for the opposition parties to agree to allow this extremely long and detailed amendment to the Constitution to be passed. It fell to me to do a great deal of the spade work in this regard. And today, 25 years after passing that amendment, I'm glad to inform you that we have 250,000 institutions of local self-government all around the country. To these institutions, we have elected, please hold on to your seats, we've elected 32 lakh representatives. They're just elected by the people themselves. And of the 32 lakh elected representatives, 14 lakh are women. There are more elected women in India alone than in the rest of the world combined. I think that is a matter of enormous pride. Also, by a system of reservations for scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and women, including women belonging to the scheduled tribes and scheduled castes. We have got over 1 lakh of those who used to be called untouchables as presidents of these institutions of local self-government. And we've got women occupying 1/3 of the positions everywhere as presidents of their respective organizations. The result is that today there are approximately 86,000 women who are running their own institutions of local self-government. And the biggest discovery of all has been that it is lower class, lower caste women who are taking the greatest advantage of Panchayati Raj because they have to be in the public sphere to earn their living. So when they're given an opportunity of coming into the public political sphere, they take to it so much more easily that as against 33, just giving one example, as against 33% reservations for scheduled caste women in Karnataka, the number actually elected is 54%. And against 33% reservations for tribal women, the share actually elected is 65%. And in the state of Haryana, which is a very regressive state, I'm sorry to say, or at any rate a state under a regressive government, they've just introduced educational qualifications and other qualifications which have debarred 85% of the women who got elected in the previous election from even standing now. So the only way richer women are able to recapture power in the villages is by preventing poorer women from entering into the system and standing against them. Now this institutionally has resulted in Panchayati Raj becoming inelectable, irreversible, and irremovable. So we got the institutions up. But the state governments, and to a large extent the central government too, are extremely reluctant to part with real power to these institutions. So the institutions exist, but the degree of empowerment is very, very unsatisfactory. You didn't mention it, so I'm going to add it, that I was India's very first minister of local self-government. Okay. It's called as Minister of Panchayati Raj. And with 21 state governments, because our constitution says that this is the responsibility of the states, I entered into memoranda of understanding as to how to bring this about. The one state that wouldn't let me visit them was Gujarat, under the chief ministership of the gentleman who's now the Prime Minister of India. So we did have problems to face. But this, I will say, having closely surveyed the progress of the system over the past 25 years that I've been deeply involved with it, I would say in every state of India, there has been some progress towards effective empowerment. But there are states in India like Kerala and Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, that have gone far ahead of others. There are some curious little small states that have done exceedingly well, like Tripura and Sikkim and Himachal Pradesh. The worst performer of all, surprise, surprise, is Uttar Pradesh. It's the worst performer. But Bihar has done quite well. So I do not despair. When I asked Rajiv once, how long did he think it would take for us to effectively implement these reforms, he said at least a generation. And I was shocked out of my wits. But now a generation has passed, because it's now more than 25 years since we passed that legislation. We've made some progress, but there's so much more to do that I have to admit that I think it will take at least another 25 years before we can move forward. But until we put governance in the hands of the ungovernable, I'm afraid the governance of the ungovernable is simply impossible. We cannot do it with Reddy and Dr. Ishrat Husain and myself. We are incapable of governing our country. Our people are entirely capable of governing themselves.
Thank you. I think that resonates with everybody here. Dr. Reddy, what would you think, and give an overview of your view on what Dr. Ishrat is proposing in his book?
Is it okay, or am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You.
At the outset, I want to express my gratitude for being invited here. The arrangements are excellent. The ambience is very conducive, both for creative thinking and intense feeling, as I can see. I will start with the title of the book. I think, as you said, people talk about it in the drawing rooms, but to have a title, with that title, I think it requires courage.
Yes, it's a brave book.
It requires courage. And therefore, I must compliment Dr. Husain for that. Second, you see, to say that a country is ungovernable by a public intellectual, it requires courage to be able to do that. Second, the interesting question posed by him in the book is Pakistan preordained to remain ungovernable, mired in a state of ceaseless, recurring crisis, or can it become governable once more? There's a sensitivity to the whole issue and an urgency to this issue. And I think that is again something which many of us, quote unquote, intellectuals are lacking. The system that encourages public intellectuals, Dr. Husain, I think has a lot of hope. I mean, that you are able to debate such issues, such sensitive issues. And more important, I have known him when I was governor in the Reserve Bank of India. He was governor here. And I used to wonder, a man of that integrity and that background, if a system could make him the governor of a central bank, I think there is something to be said about a system. It can't be all that ungovernable.
Yes.
See, my submission is there are no absolutes in governance. There is misgovernance in every country.
Yep.
There is misgovernance in every system. Sometimes it is more, sometimes it is less. Each country has its own, like unhappy marriages, their own reasons why it is misgoverned. So it's a question of difference in degrees. In some cases, at some period, it becomes intolerable or very difficult. So therefore, the way I look at it is that this book explains how governance matters, and Pakistan is a case. I would treat it as a case in some ways about the balance between good governance and misgovernance. My first comment about the book is that I enjoyed reading it. Quick reading.
Yes.
I received it just last week. My general comments. At one level, the book is very light reading. Very light reading, describing the challenges, achievements, and shortcomings of Pakistan over the past 7 decades. Just gives a sweep. It is very informative, it is very appealing. At another level, it's a very serious reading. It is backed by substantial research, analysis, and insights. It's very serious reading from which one can learn not only about Pakistan, but about the issues that are faced in different countries. For my part, after this quick reading, I decided that I'll do justice only if I concentrate in a couple of chapters. So I read preface, introduction, and conclusion.
Yeah.
Now, I read the others, but let me say, these 3 chapters I reread because I wanted to write my comments. Now, what is the preface? See, the preface brings out the system. See, the most impressive is an impressive methodology. The preface explains the impressive methodology that he has adopted. It's a combination of theory, empirical studies, data, insights. So, Dr. Husain puts it very succinctly, eclectic. Eclectic, so he's not a prisoner of any ideology or theory. He draws what is best from all the theories and contextually, given the context, what is most appropriate. So I think that is something which complex societies like ours require. So most important, I take it from the preface and his methodology is that context is important. In fact, we have a saying in Telugu, which I followed as governor, Samayamu Sandarbhamu. For every solution, you must find whether it is at the right time and is it appropriate to that situation? I think Samayamu Sandarbhamu is the eclectic, and I followed that and I see this analysis. Most important, the subject matter is unique. I read many books, how countries can become rich, how countries who are poor, and what are the reasons. That sort of books I read. But here is a book, you see, and some countries say how the rich countries became richer. But now here is a book which says why and how does the country get left behind. It's a new field in the literature in some senses. Or then there are many books on how countries reach, but how you deteriorate and then how you can come up. So again, the subject matter is unique. Another feature of the book is it laments the immediate past, but gives hope for the future. See, very often we say, nahi hoga, ye chalega, nahi chalega. So there is no such thing. He is very critical about the present, but he is quite positive about the future. And it recognizes the contextual challenges, I would say. And the contextual challenges he places, in my view, are common to us. I'll quote the author. Going forward, Pakistan's economy has to face a myriad of complex challenges arising from uncertain global environment. We should not underestimate that. In the history, I think we are going through a period of very, very high, after Second World War. This next 10 to 15 years is likely to be very highly uncertain global environment. An explosive knowledge economy. It is so explosive that in the West, they want to restrict the working days to 1.5 per week to maintain employment. 1.5 days to 2 days per week. 1.5 days to 2 days. That's if they are doing it, imagine for us, with our population. Then it comes disruptive technologies, demographic transition, imagine our demography, and climate change. I would say this is a brilliant summary of challenges ahead. Perhaps for Pakistan more, but for almost every country. Now the objective of the book, again, as per the author, is to generate debate on actions, quote, necessary to arrest and reverse the process of institutional decay that is identified as critical for development. Now my point is, where should the debate take place? Where should the debate take place? I think in the streets of Pakistan. That's where it should be. They have to react, they are affected most. And so my suggestion is please translate it to Urdu or Punjabi or what. And that is how. See, it has to come from there. The pressure has to come from there. So my sincere suggestion is, as soon as possible, the whole, or at least an edited part of it, should be, and I'm not making it empty suggestion, I can back it up. My autobiography was first published in Telugu. In Telugu. And when I released the book in Telugu, when I went out, the drivers mobbed me. This is the first time we heard something which we could understand in the hall. So I believe that's where it has to be. So I'm making the suggestion very, very seriously. Now let me go to the introduction. The critical question raised is, why did a top performer till 1990, Pakistan, fall behind later? More important, which backed by data, it dismisses the common beliefs with impressive evidence as at best partially true. Each one may be partially true. Now, what are they? Security deficit, availability of generous foreign assistance, global economic conditions, garrison state syndrome, military large corporate nexus. He just, and the surveys show this, but ultimately he is able to establish that not a single reason is enough to explain the whole situation. Dr. Husain's conclusion is that the institutions of governance, and the author backs it up with extensive literature, the institutions of governance is a complex subject, and the question is how to do it, and that's even more difficult. Diagnosis all of us do. In fact, in our country we have a lot of analysis on how to measure poverty. But what to do about it, we don't have many economic scholars. Many economists are specialized in counting the number of poor than doing something about it. So now let's look at what he says. He says, how can this asymmetric and unequal power relationship between the weak civilian institutional setup and strong institutional military may be reversed for the long-term development of democracy and sustained economic growth and shared prosperity in Pakistan? Dr. Husain gives an answer: strengthen civil institutions, not weaken military. Very often in the debate they say, no, it's too powerful. Something like that. Curb the power. So that's not what it is. It's far easier to handle a situation where you empower the civilian institutions so that it's more positive and the whole system improves. So I think that's something about positive in the approach that he's advocating for the change in balance. Instead of curbing, you change the balance. And I think that approach should be commended. So restructuring key institutions, etc. So, but I think you had suggested whether there's something we can learn or we can say about it. I cannot say much because this you have to experience. But I'll share my experiences, a couple of experiences. First, see, there's a widespread feeling globally and in India also that it is 1990 reforms. After the reforms, India has grown very fast and it has transformed itself. So my point is, in the first quarter century after independence, all contentious issues like linguistic states, official language, judicial supremacy were settled. The institutional setup was settled in the first 25 years. That was a difficult task. Second, from 1990 we had peace. The dividend of peace, we should not underestimate the dividend of peace for growth. So I think it's not just economic reforms. The work that was done for institutional strengthening before the reforms and the fact that there was peace during this period, I believe those two are very important in my view, which we cannot ignore, if I have to say what's our lesson. And an interesting question is whether reform in India was led by experts or by political leadership. I think generally if you see the literature, we think that the experts, the reformers, have brought about the reform, particularly economists. They were there when the crisis was created. All the economists, all the top technical experts were part of the system when the country was led into the crisis. So how did it happen? What made it different was the political leadership. The problem was known, the solutions were known, but the political management of the problem, that could not be managed. Then comes Mr. P.V. Narasimha Rao, and he is able to say, okay, I'll manage the political side, you implement the reform. So I think in the ultimate analysis, and I served the government also both before, during and after, I think in the ultimate analysis, the deciding factor is the political leadership. But what we can do is we can enable, we can explain, we can try to convince both the public and the leadership. But we cannot bring about reform as technical solutions. Technical solutions are not that difficult. Political management is more difficult. Now, what's the best outcome? What is the best outcome of the reform? It is not GDP. It is not GDP. It is the states. Mr. Alyar has brought many instances of different states. It shows how different states can compete. Now let me give you an example of what was the economic debate in India before 1990. Left, right, communist, ideology, capitalism, socialism. Last 5-7 years, what is the debate? Tamil Nadu model, Bihar model, Gujarat model. Different states have different models. So they have each had their own systems. They learned other things. So the way I look at it is, the biggest contribution of the reform is that the reform has shifted to the states. And each state is able to produce, good, bad, indifferent, doesn't matter. They are able to produce, they are competing. It's not one model, it's not one leader. And again, if you see from 1990, for 25 years, the highest growth rate in the country, and it was a coalition government. And you take the crisis, 1990 to 93, I was Joint Secretary Balance of Payments. 1990 was the stress, 91 crisis, 92 reform, 3 years. In these 3 years, we had 3 prime ministers. We had 3 finance ministers. We had 3 governors. We had 3 finance secretaries. We had 3 chief economic advisors. The crisis was handled. The reform was started. And the negotiations with IMF were completed even before the new government took over. So the point is, it's not just political stability. More important is political system stability. The system should be there. ABC, unfortunate, our leader Rajiv Gandhi was assassinated. But still, that was a very critical time. The system went on. So in my view, again, we have to emphasize, and that's again, Dr. Husain's book is important, how to strengthen the system. System is important. I endorse the conclusion of the book. Single factor explanations are simplistic and misleading, although each of them is a contributing factor. Just as there are multiple explanations for the deterioration in economic performance in Pakistan last 25 years, there will be multiple ways. There will be multiple ways in which Pakistan will move up in terms of, but the way, that's why you can't predict a single model, but you have an approach. And the moderator had asked me to comment on choice between across the board and selective reforms. Should be across the board or selective reforms?
Yes.
My answer is a bit of each. Depends on the circumstances. If there's a crisis, you can have across the board. If there's no crisis, you try across the board, there'll be a huge reaction.
Yeah.
Then what you have to do is you have to chip in. Usually reform, pain is immediate, gain is later. Those who have incurred pain, they incur pain. Those who gain don't see the gain. There's always a problem. So you have to negotiate. So therefore I think you have to, the reformers should have a goal. And that goal, how to reach every window of opportunity from time to time, should be taken by all the stakeholders. And that's where I think and very often it's not that it stops at Big Bang. Even very often in many countries, you will see going back. 2 steps forward, 1 step backward, etc. So I think in India, by and large, it has been only slow, but still going forward. On leadership, again, we had mentioned about the leadership. See, in my view, a leader can make a difference at a particular point of time. But the policies, economic policies of a country, they are determined by 4 I's. Institutions, ideology, individuals and interests. The institutions, ideology, interests and individuals. These 4 have to interact. And history is sometimes something more important, something maybe less important. So I think it's in different proportions. So about Indian experience, again, I have already shared the 3rd question you have asked. So, but my way I look at it is, the book is a reader's delight, and actually I told Dr. Husain, apart from his own contribution, his research team also must be excellent. And I was wondering whether he could help me with some guidance to write a similar book on India. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Reddy. I think we've all learnt from your wisdom. Thank you very much. And now, of course, Dr. Ishrat, if you would like to tell us a little bit about the book and its central hypothesis.
Thank you very much. First of all, let me thank the 2 very learned panelists who have come especially to attend the Karachi Literary Festival and to comment on my books. I learned a great deal from both of them. I also wish to acknowledge the contribution UBL has made in hosting this particular session. And I'm extremely grateful to all of you for coming out on a Saturday afternoon where you may be doing something much better than listening to this session. So I'm grateful to you. The genesis of this book was my reflection as to why in the 1947 to 1990, when Pakistan was going through many existential challenges, was considered one of the top 10 performing countries in the world with a growth rate of 6% per annum for 40 years. Other countries were way behind Pakistan. China, India, Vietnam, you name them. We were the new kid on the block. everybody used to come and visit Pakistan to learn from its experience. And let me remind the youngsters, because I normally am very much motivated when I see the young men and women, because they are not aware as to what trepidations Pakistan had to go through. It was a state with very weak economic base and absolute no industry, no infrastructure at all. It went through the war in 1965, which completely destroyed the momentum of economic growth. Then we were confronted with the separation of East Pakistan in 1971. The fourth challenge we had, that a very capable and charismatic leader, popularly elected, Mr. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, nationalized our educational institutions, banks and industries, and completely reversed the process of industrialization in this country. Then we were confronted with the Afghan war, which brought along with it a culture of drugs, Kalashnikovs, and Islamic fundamentalism in this country. Despite these 6 challenges, Pakistan was a star performer. Then, starting from 1990 to 2015, we have become the laggard even in our South Asia region. What to compare with China or Vietnam, just leave them alone. The gap between the Indian economy and Pakistan economy, which was only 5 times, has now grown to 8 times. And Bangladesh, which does not have one single bale of cotton, exports $36 billion of textiles, garments, compared to the entire exports of Pakistan of 21 billion. Our growth rate has come down from 6 and 6.5% to 4 and 4.5%. With a population growth rate of 2.3%, this is not a very satisfactory state of affairs. So I looked at the literature, and one of the advantages of being in Washington, D.C. is that you have a tremendous resource, which is the Library of Congress. It has the material which you can never get anywhere else. And I looked at what the explanations of Pakistan's decline have been. The first and the foremost is that Pakistan is a fragile, a failing state with nuclear weapons, with Islamic extremists roaming around, with unending rivalry with India, with the tension relations with the US, and therefore this terrorism and extremism are the reasons why Pakistan is not doing well. But ladies and gentlemen, the episodes of the terrorism started in 2001 after 9/11. But the rot in Pakistan started in 1990. When we were a peaceful nation, there were no terrorist attacks, there were no unruly activities of the kind we have witnessed in the 2001 period onwards, but it was a poor economic performance. And in 2002 to 2007, when there were attacks made on the President and the Prime Minister, on the GHQ, on our Air Force base, on our naval base, we grew by 6.5% to 7%. Therefore, this explanation of the failed and the failing state and the extremism does not hold grounds on the basis of evidence. The second, which is now an established convention anywhere in Pakistan or outside, that whenever Pakistan has received generous foreign assistance, Pakistan has done well. And this period has been coterminous with the military regimes. So 1960s, we were a good performer. 1980s, we were good performers. 2000 and 2007, we were excellent performer, and it was always because of generous assistance. I also had the similar preconception. But when I looked at the data, ladies and gentlemen, there is no significant difference between the flows of the foreign assistance during 1960s and 1970s, 1980s and 1990s, and 2000 and 2000 post-2008 period. Actually, there has been more foreign assistance in the period of low economic growth and non-military governments. So that myth is also not able to explain the poor performance of Pakistan. The third, and again a very popular hypothesis, is that Americans and the West have always helped the military dictators because they can take dictation from the West, and therefore they provide stability. And when you have political stability, you have economic growth. The first break from the US-Pakistan relations took place in Ayub Khan's period when they walked out in 1965 from Seato and Sento agreement. The second came in Yahya Khan's time in 1971 when the US, despite all assurances, did not come to help of Pakistan. The third happened in 1977 when Symington Amendment was triggered by Jimmy Carter during Ziaul Haq's period. And the fourth came when Musharraf was put under the military sanctions because he overthrew a democratic government. So the most difficult periods in Pakistan's history came during the military regimes, and therefore the stability argument is also not supported by evidence. The fourth argument is, what can we do? We live in a globalized world, and the global economic conditions have not been very favorable. Let me remind you, and this is recorded, that the developing countries have never done so well as they have done between 1990 to 2008, before the global financial crisis. The per capita incomes of developing countries have increased by 70%. The share of the developing countries in the world exports has gone up from 27% to 41%. And today it is close to almost 50%. Life expectancy, adult literacy, health indicators all have improved. So this argument that we were crushed because of the global economic conditions also is not true. And finally, the most popular among both Pakistani writers as well as the Western is, Pakistan is a garrison state where its unending rivalry with India has forced it to spend all its money on defense, nuclear expenditures, and security, and therefore it has diverted its resources from education, health, social sectors, and development. I believe that too. The fact is that during the 40 years when Pakistan had 6.5% growth, our defense expenditure was growing by 9%. It was 6% of GDP. In the 1990 to 2015, the defense expenditure has actually come down to 2.9% of GDP. And the growth rate of defense expenditure is only 3%. It is now education and health which are the most fast-growing expenditures as far as Pakistan's public spending is concerned. So this garrison state hypothesis which is very, very attractive, very sexy, very important in public mind, is also exploded by evidence. So if these are the 5 explanatory hypotheses which do not stand the test of time, what is the explanation? So I looked at the theoretical and empirical data and analysis. IMF found that governance has a statistically significant impact on per capita incomes across 93 countries and explains 75% of the variation. Asian Development Bank finds that government effectiveness, regulatory quality, and rule of law were the factors which were responsible for higher growth. Asimoglu and Robinson, in their book, Why Nations Fail, have argued that good institutions ensure relatively equal access to economic opportunities, and therefore those which have good institutions do well. Coming back to Pakistan, the study by Rashida Haq and Uzma Zia shows clearly for 1996 to 2005 period that whenever we had good governance in Pakistan, we had higher growth, poverty reduction, and reduction in income inequality. So that is the evidence, which then led me to look at the governance indicators. And I've looked at 20 different indicators. And Saqib Shirani, who has also done the same kind of work, found that Pakistan has performed poorly during 1996 to 2015 in all 6 components of governance. So if you look at the Indian indicators, they are all moving up. Bangladesh, they are all moving up. Pakistan is all going down. That is a very important finding as far as the differential growth between India and Pakistan is concerned. Now, Woodrow Wilson Center has been carrying out an annual conference every year on different subjects. They have 10 years diagnostic studies by experts on tax mobilization, energy shortages, law and order, losses of public enterprises, poor delivery of education and health services, and stagnating trade. And in each of these studies, when you peel the onion, the core is the failure of the institutions which are responsible for delivery of these services, whether it is police, or it is the judiciary, or it is the civil service, or it is the public sector enterprises, or it is the distribution companies, or it is the educational institutions. That is the common theme which comes out. So this gives rise to the question as to what to do about it. And I'm grateful to Governor Reddy that he already pointed out that I have changed my tack. I had the fortune of heading the National Commission for Government Reforms, and one of my colleagues, very illustrious colleague Shams Lakha, is present here. We traveled throughout Pakistan, listened to people, observed how the government working, talked to the secretaries to the government, and we came up with very comprehensive recommendations for across the board reforms in Pakistan's governance structure. But 3 governments, successive governments, have not done anything to implement those reforms. So I had to change my tack. I can either say, oh, I give up, but I don't give up. So in this book, I said, which are the 24, 25 key institutions? If you can reform them, you will have a positive spillover effect and a demonstration effect for others. Public Service Commission, Auditor General of Pakistan, Election Commission of Pakistan, parliamentary committees on oversight. These are some of the institutions which will take you to higher growth, to equity, to security, and to transparency. So if you follow only these 24, you will have islands of excellence. And I must say this, that we have experimented on this model in two institutions, the State Bank of Pakistan and IBA. So it's not out of theory. All the recommendations which you are making in order to make these institutions effective have been applied in these cases. And therefore, this is not an empty theoretical recommendation. So the book ends with a plea to the political leaders that reforms are not going to affect either the PPP or the PMLN or the PTI, because they will transcend the electoral cycles. So they will be better off if they accept this above the partisan politics and agree to implement these 25 institutional reforms, which will lead to Pakistan becoming once again governable as it was between 1947 to 1990, and it's become ungovernable in 1990 to 2015. That is the roadmap which we have traced. It is open for debate. It is not a final conclusive solution, but I wanted to present that this is the second best solution in order to improve the governance in this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think all of us have had our minds opened, because a lot of what I refer to when we talk in drawing rooms, the theories that we put forward, and Dr. Ishrat has been very brave that he also had these preconceptions, and then when he really looked at the data, it wasn't really the reason. In the interest of time, because we have only about 10 minutes, so I thought I would open the floor to questions, so that we can accommodate as many people as possible, and we don't have much time. So I'd like people who are interested just to, not to give their comments or views, but just to ask a member of the panel, whoever they choose, a very short, brief, and a concise question, because we, in 10 minutes another session has to start here. So there are mics around, if you'd put up your hand. Is the gentleman there?
Assalamu alaikum. My name's Syed Masha. Brief question. A popular economist named Paul Collier wrote a book called Wars, Guns, and Votes. In there, he went on research on almost 60 countries, and he basically boiled down his conclusion was that until the per capita income of a country is not at $2,700, then democracy will only flourish if it's above that, and if it's under that, autocracies will flourish. So you have a case like African democracies where you have Mugabe, for example, who recently was removed 40 years or 30 years in power and winning the election 98% of the vote. And these type of issues that occur. So how do you think that's relevant in Pakistan? We're at $1,500, and I think India's at $1,700. So maybe a comment on that in respect to that.
Dr.
I have worked on Africa. I was the chief economist for Africa for the World Bank. And I tell you that there are countries which are poorer than Zimbabwe, like Ghana, who have done extremely well as far as the democratic transitions are concerned. They have open, I would say, undisputed elections, and they have thrown out the existing big man. So Paul is a friend and I respect him, but he has taken a mean tendency. But there are deviations across that mean. And India is a very good example. The same India was growing at what was called as the Hindu rate of growth of 3% per annum. And then the same India, which has democracy uninterrupted, is growing by 7.5%, with 1.2 billion people. That is what the democracy or non-democracy, to me, are irrelevant as a variable explaining the economic performance.
So, gentleman here? Gentleman there? No, the gentleman there, sorry. He's had his hand up for a long time.
Yeah, I have a question, Dr. Ishrat Husain. I wish the governments had implemented your reforms, and knowing Dr. Ishrat Husain for several years. But as we have seen that Pakistan has grown by 5.3% last year, and according to IMF, Pakistan will be growing at perhaps 5.6%. And in 2018, the international organizations, they are saying that India will be the fastest growing nation in this world, and China would become the second, and Pakistan, the numbers as presented by it looks like Pakistan is going to be the fastest growing economy in the world after China and India at 5.6%. So how is it possible? I wish if they implement the reforms put by you, I think we can grow even at 7%. But how is it possible that, even with so much mismanagement and non-governance, Pakistan is still becoming the fastest growing nation in the world after India and China?
Well, you have the experience. We were the third fastest growing economy between 2002 to 2007. China was number 1, India was number 2, Pakistan was number 3. But 5.8% is not what we should be looking for. We have 1 to 1.5 million young men and women who are entering our labor force. And therefore, we need 7 to 8% growth rate in order to move to absorb those young men and women. If you don't do that, you will have a social explosion in this country. And that's why these reforms will help us move to that trajectory of 7 to 8% which is required. I'm not satisfied with 5.8%. So whatever the third or the fourth, I don't care. I'm more interested Pakistan growing at 7 to 8% per year.
We can just take 2 more, and there's a gentleman there who's really eager. So
just one comment and one question to you. The comment was that probably Paul Condia was referring to, or should have referred to, purchasing power parity as opposed to nominal GDP, because then you would find that that thing actually works. Number 2, the question that I wanted to ask was that the war on terror has cost us, according to Dr. Pasha, I just attended his session earlier on, $135 billion, right? So how does that equate with what you said, that militancy and terror hasn't really affected our rate of growth?
123 billion over 135 over 18 years is less than 10 billion rupees per year, $10 billion per year, right? It's not even 8 or 9. Our economy is $300 billion economy. So 8%, 8 billion is a minuscule portion to affect your GDP. That is my answer. And that number, by the way, I have great respect for Mr. Pasha, but that number is composed of several assumptions. That's not on very hard data. So I would be very cautious even in accepting that number at the face value. Yes, we have lost. Whether it is 160 or it is 100 or 135, I really cannot say that with degree of confidence.
okay, I think we're out of time at the moment. I'm sorry. And I would encourage all of you to actually read the book, and if you can get a chance to talk to Dr. Ishrat later. But I think the main conclusion that comes from the book is it's really up to us. We need to stop looking at externals and blaming this country, this government, that happened, this happened. It's up to us. If we can implement reform, And as we said, we're not ungovernable. And if the reform comes in, we can move forward. Thank you very much, the panel. Thank you for your wisdom. And thank you, all of you, for listening. Thank you.